there's a statistical reasoning for this and the mathematics behind it. So I'd love just to delve into that. Why are happy teams more successful?
When we feel good, we're able to tackle things in the outside world better.
Nic Marks is statistician, author, and the pioneer of workplace well-being. He created the Happy Planet Index and the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. And through his company Friday Pulse, he's helping organizations worldwide turn happiness into a serious business, proving that joy at work isn't a perk, it's a performance strategy.
So when we feel bad, then we go into our inner world, we become more limited. That the only group of people that take their statutory breaks are smokers. And I just thought, oh, that is really interesting, because it's really healthy to take a break every hour.
If you invest in happiness, you invest in success.
There's a suspicion of numbers around soft metrics like happiness, and it's not a soft metric, it's actually really tangible, you can really measure it. Time is the currency of relationships, and we think of time as money in businesses, which means you try and reduce it because you're trying to reduce costs. Time is the currency of relationship.
It's very good at injecting humour into the story so people don't get stuck on the same way, because they can only take so much complexity in any conversation. Let's just talk about that and how that works into this world of happiness and business and getting people out of stuck in okay.
2 questions you should ask every week.
So welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I am Phill Rose, the host, and today in our 6th year in existence, I'm delighted to be interviewing for the second time Nic Marks. Nic and I first spoke in about 2022 about his world around happiness, and today the statistician, speaker and author is going to be talking to me today about his new book, Happiness is a Serious Business. And I want to talk about lots of other things as well. So Nic and I talked before, but I've got lots of tabs in the book to go through. But Nic, welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And it's great actually, because we were talking before about the fact that we've talked before, and this is your first book that you've written from heart. You've done the TED Talks before, but this is the first full length book you've written, as far as I know.
Yeah, I wrote a short format one for TED at the time, so 15 years ago. But yeah, this is the first full length one. Yeah, it was quite tricky.
And I wanted to start there actually, because lots of people are aspiring authors, and there's a phrase I always have, that everyone has a book in them. What was it that prompted you to write this book, and why now?
I've been working on work for sort of 10-12 years now, since sort of 2012, and it was quite different than my previous work, which was in public policy, and I wanted to capture that. And I think I think it's clear, as someone that's working in organizations and business, having a book, sort of being an author makes you an authority. That's what my publisher said. and I speak a lot, as you know, and I run master classes, and it feels to me when I'm speaking that I'm playing with ideas. They're slightly in the air. It's really rather delightful. Writing a book is like really grounding them. You're committing to bullet points, and so it's quite a different process. And I think I'm a better speaker for it, actually, because I think it's really tidied up and condensed some of my thinking going through.
That's interesting. And one thing you said to me in the last couple of weeks, you said now you've got a process for doing it. You could probably transfer that and do it again. So there's probably some learnings in there that you could convey as a message for people about how to write their book.
Yeah, I did struggle. I'm almost certainly dyslexic. I was never diagnosed at school, but writing isn't necessarily my skill. In fact, I said to my mother, "Oh my God, I'm finding it really hard to write this book." And she goes, "Well, you did once get a school report calling you the illiterate mathematician." So I probably am a classic, but if you just get on with things, I still can't spell. So actually that means I write very simply in some ways. I don't use long words because I can't spell them. And I don't know what they mean. So I keep things simple. And so it was a process of condensing that and thinking about what I wanted to communicate. So,
and I love that phrase, illiterate mathematician, because at the end of the day, when we last talked some years ago, you described yourself as a statistician with soul. And I think it's really interesting, because I think that illiterate mathematician says something about you in there, because you are a great mathematician, but you've also got this ability as a great communicator, and that's something I've seen over the years since I've known you in the last 3 or so years.
Yeah, I think it's kind of my quirk to have the sort of people and data skills in one place. And I mean, the statistician with a soul was a quote from a client, and then my marketing department. Yes, it was. Yeah. a client called me a statistician with a soul, and I think it's because he was relieved to meet a statistician that had that sort of communication side. And then someone else said to me, it's a bit unfair on other statisticians. They have souls too. And I thought, yeah, it is a bit unfair, isn't it? Of course they do. But it's just something that caught, and of course it did, because it's a funny expression to come up with.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? But I think that thing about that mathematician, because I think that sits a lot behind you. And just for people who haven't listened to the previous podcast, I'd love just to do a quick potted history of what got you here, because you did the TED Talk, you went through the policy work. Why and how have you got to this point now, before we carry on with what happiness is a serious business is all about?
Yeah, I mean, my whole journey into sort of measurement, I thought I was a mathematician, but I went to Cambridge to read maths, and I was not, because I saw real mathematicians. So I actually, I'm an applied statistician. I sort of numbers are my way of thinking about the world. And so I did lots of work, on quality of life statistics. I worked as a, management consultant in Arthur Andersen and what do they now call Accenture. I did that sort of stuff. And then I trained as a therapist, which is kind of my quirk. And so then the people and data started to come together. And then, by happenstance, really, I got challenged in 2001 to start some work on well-being and public policy. I'd already done some work for the think tank on other measures and stuff. And they said, oh, you think about this stuff around, sort of therapy and change and also stats, maybe it's just something well-being. And so I started that work, and that's what became a sort of an unexpectedly successful strand of work that became the TED Talk. And then I'd done that for 10, 12 years, and I thought, maybe I need a change. And policy is very slow moving. And I thought, well, I'm just as critical about how businesses measure employee experience as I am governments measure population well-being. Maybe I should do something on that. And that started a journey that I started working with organizations, doing the measurement of employee experience, team happiness. And then that's really what gets into the book, and it's a very different world, business. And there was a lot of naivety about my business skills in it, but my sort of statistical skills and what I've done and the methodology. I'm very proud of,
And it's interesting because I think that methodology that sits behind it, because there's a lot of rigor in it, and it's a good book. I hope to see it on an airport shelf one day. Actually, I think this is one of the key things. When you're checking out of Terminal 5 and you see the book there, you've really hit the big time in that sense. And I think when I was last flying, I remember seeing Daniel Priestley's book. And if I think about Daniel Priestley, who wrote Key Person of Influence back in 2010 when he was first kicking off that business, he's done what he set out to do, become a KPI. And when your book's on the bookshelf next to Stephen Bartlett, you've hit it in that. So I look forward to seeing this here. We'll look promoting it. So let's think about this in that case. The subhead on this is why happy teams are more successful and how to build them. Now, everyone knows that at heart, I would hope. But I wonder what's the real reason behind this, because there's a statistical reasoning for this and the mathematics behind it. So I'd love just to delve into that. Why are happy teams more successful?
We can show they are, and we can show that in causal data as well as correlational, which is that we can see that as people become happier, they do better. So we can see that through time. And I can talk about that study if you want me to. But the why question really comes down to our ability to deal with complexity, which is that when we feel good, we're able to tackle things in the outside world better. So when we feel bad, then we go into our inner world, we become more limited, and we feel good, we become more expanded. And so in a complex, fast-moving world, if people feel good, they can respond to the changes better. That's really
that's interesting. And it's interesting. I was sharing with someone this week, actually, one of the Gallup Q12 questions is around, do you feel you've got a best friend at work, or words to that effect? And what you've said there probably rings into that as well, because when we feel good, and if we've got someone at work we can confide in and talk about, we probably feel better about ourselves. It helps build our self-esteem, and therefore we probably do better work. Is that a correlation you can make between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot made of that Gallup question, and I think it doesn't translate well into English, because best friend feels quite exclusive in English.
That's interesting.
So in America, I think that goes down easier. I mean, if I use a question about having good friends, I think good friends is easier in England than best friends. And relationships are really, really important. They're the cornerstone, the foundation of team relationships, particularly. And it's good to get along with your colleagues. That's a strength that becomes a sort of systemic resilience. When you've got good relationships.
And it's interesting that word "good friends," because I think I did get some pushback from the client the other day saying we probably need to translate it. And I think you're right, that good friends is probably a really good articulation of that, because yeah, not many people would probably say they have a best friend at work, BFF, in my daughter's language. But actually, when you can talk about having good friends at work, that's it doesn't have to be a best friend, but it's someone you can feel that you're part of the team.
I mean, well, there's team relationships and there's friendships, and they can be the same or not. It might be you have a friend outside of the team. I mean, I don't know if you're coming to this in your tabs, but I make a bit of a joke in the book about smokers.
I have, yes, okay, I have got that. My first tab is actually on page 7, so yeah, if we keep tell me about the smokers.
Well, the smokers thing is that smokers are really good at building friendships between teams, and so they build unusual relationships, and it's obviously smoking isn't good for you. But I have this tip for dealing with short-term stress, which is if you're short-term stress, think what a smoker would do, and then it becomes a mnemonic, which is stop what you're doing, move your body, go O outside, K kickstart conversations. And then the E is what I think even smokers don't realize what they're doing. But do you smoke?
No, I haven't. Smoked? Interesting. No.
No, I never smoked either. But my image of a smoker at work is that they're sort of their heads kicked back and their sort of eyes are closed and they're slightly missed out. And what they're doing is mindful breathing, but with carcinogens, which is that they are slowing down their breathing and they are doing mindful breathing, which is really, really good to relax. Obviously, the carcinogens are not good. So and then they are relaxed. So I say that smoker, stop what you're doing, move your body, go outside, kickstart conversations, exhale longer than you inhale, and relax. And but in the context we're just saying about friendships, having friendships across teams is good. It's good to have little outlets. If you do get stressed, something's going wrong, to have a friend you can go and talk to, maybe not even closely involved in your work, is actually really good.
So it's really interesting. You asked me if I ever smoked, and I haven't. But I remember when I first started work at Rolls-Royce back in the good old days of 1993. I remember at that time there were quite a lot of smokers in the department that I was working in. It was called a department, and one of the ladies there who was responsible for the payroll of the agency staff, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but she worked out that the smokers were earning more in their smoke breaks than she was in her whole day, because of how much they were being paid as contractors. But the key point was they were going out and taking time to relax and be with other people, a bit like the water cooler break, but they were going to do it on a regular basis. And I think there's something there, that I had never considered before, but actually they are getting two things there. They're filling their lungs with carcinogens, yes, but they're also taking a downtime, taking a stress relaxant break.
Yeah, I mean, the idea came to me because I heard, I was speaking at a conference, and obviously you listen to other speakers, and someone said, and they definitely were American because I remember it in an American accent, they said that the only group of people that take their statutory breaks are smokers. And I just thought, oh, that is really interesting, because it's really healthy to take a break every hour. It's short 3-5 minute break. And of course, a cigarette does that. In fact, I told this at a conference I was speaking at just last week about smokers. And this woman came up to me and she goes, that's why I started smoking, because I was in a really stressful job. And you realize the only people that got their breaks were smokers. So I thought, damn it, I'm going to start smoking. She said it made me a 10, 20-year habit, which I'm not proud of. But that was exactly why I started.
That's really interesting. So it's sad, isn't it? But we should all be able to do it. And I think we all get sucked into that way of thinking. We just keep working and just going out for that movement. And I love your smoker acronym there. And I need to remember that, because I think there's a lot to be said for that in terms of, de-stress, relax, take that relaxing breath and do those things, and just stand up and be away from your desk for a minute, and you can learn more. And here's the thought. So I think there's a lot to be said for this around it. And one of my first questions around, if I look at my page 7 tab, was why should people invest in that? I know we've talked about this before, but having been in America for the last week in Austin, learning from people there, I bumped into someone at the coffee queue who works at Tesla. So Austin headquarters of Tesla. And it was at the same time that Musk had just been awarded his potential 10-year deal worth over £760 million, $1 billion. And I just got talking to her in the coffee queue, and we were in the centre of Austin. And I just asked her, what's it like working at Tesla? And she says it's high pressure. Now, I don't know. Let's just extrapolate that there. Coffee breaks, taking time out, happiness, things like that. Your first point in here is the number speaks for themselves. Happy teams are successful teams. And if you invest in happiness, you invest in success. I just want to delve into that, because we know that, but how do you help people? What's the mindset shift people need to have to say, taking time out for this happiness thing is worthwhile for my bottom line and my long-term value of this business?
So I think it's different pain points and different businesses, but different sectors. The three big ones are underperformance, which is a bit nebulous actually. I mean, I think people find that a little hard to relate to, but the data's pretty clear that happier teams are 20 to 30% more productive, or have higher sales. So again, the more complex a role gets, the more customer facing, it becomes more important, the more relational. So the second one is what a lot of people's pain point, which is staff turnover, which is obviously the unhappy quit. Unhappiness is, happiness is a sort of sign that things are going well. Our inner and outer worlds are aligned and we feel happy. We're unhappy that they're unaligned, and that's a signal to change. So if you're unhappy in your work, clearly one of the things you're going to think of doing is quitting. That's clear from an individual perspective. So staff turnover, and so for a lot of companies, staff turnover really eats at them. And then for some companies, I'm working in I said before we came on, I'm working with an NHS board at the moment, and absenteeism is their rate, long-term sickness, and so that's people not showing up to work, and that really costs them. And if they, and so they've got people not fulfilling their roles, they've got people long-term sick, they have to cover their roles. They've got open roles, which means there's more stress around. So they've got, that is their pain point. So, and other pain points can be a lack of innovation, creativity, adaptability, a lack of collaboration. We get a lot of silo mentality in unhappy organizations. People bunker down. So that can be it. So there are different ways it can come through.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you've got some great statistics, and your book wouldn't be what it is without those statistics in there. And I think you just quoted some there. And I think that there's things here about happier employees deliver superior outcomes, from increasing productivity and creativity to reductions in staff turnover and burnout. And I think that's one of the key things there in terms of when you look at the data makes the case. In fact, you say that, page 10, the data makes the case. And I think that's a really key point there, because actually you can't deny it, but yet people still do. And especially as the economy gets tougher, people are, I think I'm seeing a divide in two types of businesses. And again, I'm stereotyping, being in Austin for a while. I was with some great business there, but there's a lot of high pressure, high productivity businesses there. Yeah. In the UK, maybe there's other businesses who are thinking about culture. But I always think culture and commercial, I use the and conversation. A lot of people say, hey, we need to stop this fluffy culture and get on with the commercials. Me and it's not the right thing to do, but it's how would we go about convincing people that, hey, you got to do this?
Well, you can't lose sight of the commercial. So again, I might be getting ahead to one of your forward tabs, but I talk about great teams being happy and successful. I don't know if you were going to come to that. And I'm a statistician, so you give me two variables, I'm going to make a 2x2 quadrant. In fact, the consultants do it all the time, don't we? So so you've got sort of happy and not happy, and you've got low performing and high performing, or underperforming and good performance. So you've got the top right quadrant is great teams, they're happy and high performing. That's where you want to be. Bottom left is miserable teams, they're unhappy and not performing. But you've got the two side quadrants, you've got the two off diagonals, because happiness and performance are correlated, they're causal, but they're not perfectly correlated. So it's quite possible to create a team which has got good performance and isn't happy. It's quite possible to create a team that's happy and hasn't got good performance. And that's the quadrant people worry about. And I call it slacking. Other people call it coasting. But, basically teams that are underperforming, if they're happy, right? Now, the first thing to say of that is this actually relatively unusual in my data. You do find them, maybe 10% teams are that in that quadrant. In the bottom right-hand quadrant, burning out teams, I call it, they're unhappy and they're performing 3 or 4 times more than slacking teams. And their staff turnover rate, if you compare them to the other high-performing teams, the ones that are happy and high-performing, their staff turnover rate is 3 times the size. Their burnout is 3 times higher. So there's a human suffering in there. And some organizations decide to run roughshod over that, and they're going to just churn through people. I've heard senior leaders have, I don't mind getting through people. I mean, that's not the way I want to do work, but it's not really in their self-interest. I don't think they're doing their accounting right, because it's expensive to recruit people. And, it's expensive to, I know some of these big companies just think if it's a pyramid, you get this many people in, you go, Well, you're always going to be better if you can reduce that number of people churning. And if you can have good levers rather than bad levers, that's good. good leavers will speak beautifully about you afterwards to other people. So even if people are moving on, you want them to be good leavers.
Yeah.
So I find it odd. I think it's just this brutal numbers top down, and there's a suspicion of numbers around soft metrics like happiness. And it's not a soft metric. It's actually really tangible. You can really measure it, create measures of it. I'm not saying it's a perfect measure of how happy people are, but you can create really useful measures that change over time, that reflect what's going on. And so that's one of the reasons I concentrate on the data, really, because I think a lot of people make the case to appeal to people's soul, to their spirit, that this is right. Actually giving them the data and going, well, look about this. What's this? What is your staff done? How much does it cost you? What if you reduced it by 10%? How much would that save? Well, invest in this.
I love that. And actually, you've got a great graph here, actually, which I picked up, and it's all about team happiness growing over time. And I think when you look at that type of thing, you can see that. But if you've then got the correlation between the happiness, it says here team happiness building steadily over 6 months. If you've got that correlation between team happiness growing and productivity, you can see that you're moving up to that top right quadrant of the great teams. And it takes time to do that. And I think that's, you've got the data in place. And I was about to say that the data doesn't lie. We know it does lie, but actually, if you get the right data, it doesn't lie.
Yeah, and one of the things about team happiness, the way that I measure it is that I ask people every week, how happy were you at work this week? So you get a very responsive indicator. It is also predictive. And I think this is one of the things that's been missing in HR and culture, is they tend to be what we call lagging indicators. So take something like staff turnover or absenteeism rates. You're measuring what has happened. So you're lagging. So when you're measuring happiness at work, particularly if you get it into like a weekly or monthly measure, you're measuring what's happening now, but it's going to predict what happens next month. So, if you feel good this week, you're going to perform better next week. In fact, I quote a very respected academic, Professor Teresa Ombeli's work on creativity, where she shows if you're in a good mood on day one, you're more likely to be creative tomorrow. And that doesn't work the other way around. So creativity and happiness are entwined. It's nice to feel creative. But if you feel creative on day one, that doesn't necessarily make you happy on day two. But feeling happy on day one does make you more creative. And kind of, I think it's a bit like, when we sleep on a problem, we wake up with a new answer. Our brain is kind of working while we're asleep. It's kind of working behind the scenes. And if we're functioning well, those connections.
I love that. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that thing about if you feel happy, and we've used Friday Pulse in the past for our team, and actually, you see the correlation, you see that happiness coming out. And I love the fact that this is a forward-looking measure as well. So we're measuring happiness today, but we can predict how the team's going to perform tomorrow as a result of that, as opposed to the rear view measure, which you get on a lot of other staff engagement scores.
I've got data that shows that if people are unhappy in quarter one, they're 3 times more likely to leave in quarter two, and it's that quick, And it's telling you, it's giving you early warning systems about if you've got.
That's interesting. I love that. And so let's think about putting this stuff in place, because you use the phrase measure, meet, and repeat, and you talk about that, and I think you've got a good approach there. So how is that different from the traditional employee engagement surveys that go out there today? Because measure, meet, repeat gives you a different flavour of the data, which you can then work with.
So I mean, behind measure, meet, repeat is that I think that measurement should feed a learning process. I like numbers, but it's like they sort of act a bit like a mirror. They show you what is, but that isn't change. Change is when you act on it. So for a long time, I've talked about a learning feedback loop. So you can think about that as people might be familiar with action learning cycles, or you're basically learning as an iterative process. And so and happiness is very systemic in that, it's very dependent on what's going on in the team and around it. And so things are always entwined, cause and effect, and everything's very, very mobile. So instead of just saying, okay, here we've had a long survey, we've done it, here is our plan for the next year, we're going to execute it, which is kind of like the traditional way. This is saying measure very regularly, respond, be responsive. And that's the measure, meet, repeat cycle. And it has to be really simple. People are really busy. So I keep it very light. So the weekly measure is literally how happy were you. Then I ask people what's gone well for them,
Yeah.
what hasn't. So you're giving them tips about what they can build on, tips they have to tackle, and you just keep it really, really simple and light, and people iterate their way forward, and that's what measure, meet, repeat is. And of course, like Atomic
Yeah.
Habits, say from James.
Yeah,
is it
James Clear, yeah.
It's clear, he says that, habits are the compound interest of change. And this cycle is the same thing, really, just a little bit. Build.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting, the habits of the compound interest of change, because if you're doing it, you're building on that. And as Einstein once said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, effectively, because actually that's or maybe it wasn't exactly that what he said, but at the end of the day, it's that compound interest, and actually you get the benefits from it longer term.
Yeah, and that is your graph you showed before. It's team happiness building slowly over time. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't suddenly, oh, okay, we're all going to be happy now. That's not how it works. It's like trust. It takes time to build, and actually, like trust, it can go very quickly too. So yeah,
interesting actually. So here's one of the biggest things in that case. So you talked about some big institutions you've worked with. You talked about the NHS. You talked about National Grid in the past and other organisations. What are the biggest barriers that people like that face, or organisations like that face, in terms of driving happiness? And then second question, which we'll ask at the same time, is how can we apply the learnings from that to these smaller organisations that are up and coming before we hit these happiness barriers?
The biggest block is absolutely undoubtedly we haven't got the time pressure, and particularly on team leaders, frontline people leaders, who've got a lot of pressure, as you were saying, in this in the Austin high pressure work environments, there's this top down drive around performance, and team leaders get squeezed, so they get this bottom up pressure of people's well-being, looking after their team, their work-life balance, their burnout, their autonomy. They're trying to always help them learn, which is, that's a respectful coaching environment, you're trying to create there. That's not easy on the team leader. And then they got this pressure, where are your results, and they get squeezed in the middle. And team leaders, I don't know the data in the US, but in the UK, the average team leader in the UK works 6 hours of overtime unpaid a week, average. The average senior leader is more like 12 hours, by the way. So they're not going to get much sympathy from the senior leaders, because they're already working 2 long hours themselves. So you get squeezed in this place, and you haven't got the time. And the real issue with this is it's true. But this probably means that, and I playfully put this in the book, that we need a new relationship with time. and I quote. I can't quite find where this phrase came from. I know where I heard it, so I quote that. But I think it comes out of couples therapy. Yeah. But the quote is, "Time is the currency of relationships."
Yeah.
And we think of time as money in businesses, which means you try and reduce it because you're trying to reduce costs. Time is the currency of relationship. You see, it's an investment. You've got to invest in relationships. We all know that as parents.
I am a parent. Yeah, 2 girls. Yes.
Yeah, if you don't spend time with them when they're young, my wife says that children spell love TIME.
Yeah, that's
it's like they've got, how we use our time, and it's very hard for team leaders to do that. But that is the reality. Is that relationships take time, and then I spin off into a bit of Greek mythology. I don't know.
Okay. So I was going to talk about Greek mythology and Shakespeare. So you've got two areas there.
Let's start with Greek mythology. Is that the Greeks rather wonderfully had 3 gods of time. I used to follow this Jungian fellow. I used to go to his workshops when I was young. Jungian psychologist called James Hillman, who was this absolute genius figure. It's American. And anyway, he used to use archetypal. He created something called archetypal psychology. He used to build a lot on the Greek myths, because they're sort of flawed humans and how they interact. So he'd find a Greek god for anything. So I found out there were 3 Greek gods of time. And so we've got Chronos. We'd think of that as chronological time, linear time. There's Aeon, which is the eons. That's repeatable, cyclical time. And then there is Kairos. And Kairos is the god I hadn't really heard of. And he's normally portrayed with wings, and he's got a forelock, a bit like me here. And as he flies past, grab it and bring him down. And what that is kind of like Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. It is seize the day. seize the moment. It's the moment. It's the moment. Making
Yeah.
the most of the moment of time. That is where the clue is about how to build
Yeah.
happy teams. Is that carve out a little bit of time, but seize that moment to talk about it, and it's making the most of that moment. Because you could set one-to-ones with people, you could have team meetings, and you can talk about the weather, and the time will go, and you can do it every week, and that would be nice, and that's okay. But if you seize it and you really get to things, that's when you're going to
Yeah,
start building.
do you know, it's really interesting actually. I was actually thinking about the Robin Williams quote the other day, because I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about it, and the bit that comes to mind, and you've said about carpe diem, seize the day, in that quote, and it really makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up now. He pulls the boys in towards the cabinet, looks at the trophies, and says, these young men who are now long since dead were once in your shoes, and he stands there against the cabinet and says, hear that? And then he says, seize the day, carpe diem, carpe diem. And the point he's making is actually, you've got to do things while you can. I think it's about that relationship build. And what he's doing is building that relationship with those young boys early on in his journey to help them think about it. And so few people, it's like, comes back to your points around the smokers. They're the ones who are seizing the day. Okay, we know they're not because of the carcinogens they're smoking in, but taking the time out. So I think that's a really key point, actually. And I love that roundabout. And I'm just looking at the page because I did have a tab on this in terms of Aeon, the God of eternal time, the time of the heavens that are both infinite and cyclical. And I think that's a really interesting look at it. But when you talk about Kairos, it's about the right time. And I really think that's an interesting point because, what is the right time? But actually, the right time to build relationships is now. Yeah. And I think that's a key point there. So so let's just carry on with that about the point of time, because I talk about red, blue, black, and green time, and red and blue is about doing the business today. Blue is about operations. It's about making the business run. Red is about the support functions. It's the lifeblood of the business. It's the money, but it's the stuff that it's the back office. Whereas black and green, black is about strategy. It's about the future. It's about building value. And green is about culture. And how few businesses spend time building culture, actively building culture, because you get the culture you deserve is the phrase I always use. Whereas if you actively build it, you can create it. It's a bit like brand perception. Some businesses are out on the high street or in the marketplace, and they got a brand perception. And it's the same with culture. You have to go and spend time on it. And if you want a culture of happiness, which builds motivation, and what you're talking about here about long-term success, to me, that sits into my black category. It's a black space, drive the future, build the business, and really focus on the people that matter as well. And I think there's something to link there in terms of that point around how do we make that work?
It's like culture is what makes things work. I mean, it was Peter Drucker who's always associated with this quote, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I think is a bit unfair because I think culture helps strategy be deployed, because if it's like you've got to have strategy, so it's not like you can just have culture. You've got to have strategy, and your culture is going to help you implement it. And actually culture is so mysterious. It's like, what is culture? And I used to have a colleague, and she used to say, "We're demystifying culture, Nick." And I was like, I used to love when she used to say that, Jodie. It's really, like CIPD, the Chartered Institute for Personnel Development. They sort of go, "Oh, culture, it's a bit tricky, really. We don't know what it is," and yet they're talking a lot about culture and how you measure it. So I think we should be very clear. And as a statistician, I think very clearly in outcomes. So I really separate out outcomes from drivers, and we need to have them. So my outcome is that a great culture enables people and teams to be happy and successful. That's what a great culture is. It's both of those things, and that will help you implement your strategies. That will help you do your black, blue, red, orange,
red, blue, black, green. every flip chart has 4 pens in it: red, blue, black, and green. Wherever you go in the world.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I think that culture is what helps you do that, and it's like, this is work we're talking about here. We're not talking about life outside where you can talk about happiness in different ways, and we're talking about getting work done together, effectively, efficiently, humanly, kindly. we want to do good work, and so happiness at work is about creating a culture that enables us to
Yeah,
good,
I
do
love that.
good
And I
work.
love your phrase there, enabling people and teams to be happy and successful. That's a great outcome
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And if that's what you want to achieve, then you've got to look at what do you need to put in place to enable that to happen. And that's where we're putting all these pieces of engagement into it, and managers spending time with their employees to make sure that they are coached in the right way when needed.
Yeah, and coaching is a hard way. I mean, engagement's an interesting word, right? I sort of push against engagement a bit as a word, because in a way, it's a made up word in this context. I mean, it's got a psychological meaning, engagement, but it means basically productivity. It's like a code word for productivity. So it lands on the employee. We want you to be more engaged. Like it feels like we want you to do more work for the same money. And that's how it kind of lands. Whereas if we say we want you to have a job you enjoy or something that's got an emotional tone on it, it lands as, oh, that's something I want to do. So I think that happiness reframes the psychological contract between the employer and employee into something that is mutually beneficial. And engagement still feels quite
That's
one-sided.
interesting. Jen, I've never thought about that point. You're right. We want engaged employees because we want productivity from them. And therefore, we want people who are buying into our business and our way of working. Therefore, they buy into the values. But actually, there's a different area, isn't it? Because what we're looking for is getting a productive business at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's business. Whatever that outcome is. If you work in not for profit, it's different than profit. But it's like that's the purpose of work, to create good outcomes. So, and if you can get employees on side with you, and you probably are an employee yourself, wherever is this person, mythical person I'm speaking to. But if everybody gets on side with it, and then everything gets aligned. Emotion is about motivation. It's about move out.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, if you get positive emotions, you get positive
Yeah,
motivation.
that's interesting, isn't it? Because then you feel better. And it comes back to that point earlier you said about that when people feel happy, they're more likely to turn up, be creative in the workplace. They're more likely to come into the following day with the ability to do more because they feel happy the day before. So actually you're driving that motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, when people feel good, they do good work. That's one of my phrases. Feel good, do good work. And then it doesn't mean there still needs to be a North Star. There still needs to be the goals, the direction, because people could amble off, So the coasting, slacking is a real thing. But that isn't about happiness. That's not working. That's about not having good business goals. That's not about accountability. These things are important in businesses. And actually they're not bad for happiness. Happiness. There is a striving part of happiness, that actually we feel good when we're challenged. So, and that goes right down to the way that positive emotions actually work. So we think of negative emotions such as anger and fear as part of the fight and flight mechanism. Sadness is about processing loss. So the negative emotions are sort of dealing with threats. Positive emotions are about creating and seizing opportunities. And there are different types of positive emotions. So in my early work on happiness, I used to ask people, oh, what does happiness mean to you? Just trying to get some sort of feeling of them. Some people would say contentment, and some would say enthusiasm. And those are very different forms of happiness, So one has got a lot of energy, one is quiet and reflective. They're both nice, yeah. And it turns out when you sort of unpick it, you've got a whole group of positive emotions. You could include within there enthusiasm, courage, interest, where you sort of are going for goals, right? And actually you slightly cut off the outside world. Like if you're courageous, you actually want to blink a risk. If you're enthusiastic, if you think of someone, I mean, an enthusiastic fool, there's nothing worse than an enthusiastic fool. They've got a lot of enthusiasm in what they are, and they're blundering forward and they're avoiding all sorts of signals. So there's some things, all these things come with limitations to them. But if you get those striving emotions right, and you get people interested and enthusiastic about goals that are set and where you're going, you're going to achieve things, And the quieter emotions are about team building. If you've got teams that are stable, where people have respect for each other, where they have almost affection for each other, they like each other, then that is going to build the things. That's going to build the platform that you can spring from. And work is a lot about springing from. But if we do too much change, people get unsettled, they get unstable, they get disrupted. And if we've got too much stability, by the way, people get bored stiff. So that's not
Yeah,
really the
so there is that
focus.
continuum, isn't there? Because we know we always talk about a VUCA world, whatever you want to phrase it. There's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, but because of the change going on. But actually, the point is, boredom comes from doing the same thing over and over again, potentially for some people. And interesting, isn't it? Because that word contentment, if you've got somebody who's working in a business and they feel content because nothing's changed, the man or woman who sits in accounts has done the same job for 30 years, they're quite content doing what they do. But are they doing it to the best of their ability? And they probably say they're happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are roles that just want stability in them, and I think, and it's finding that things that plays to people's strengths. So, and uh, I personally am the type of personality that can't cope at all with boredom. And so and maybe sometimes I overstrive, or you might be the same. Uh, and so there are personalities, and I think there are people can settle. I talk a lot in the book about, actually there's a danger of getting stuck in okay.
And in fact, that was one of my questions we're going to come to. So, okay, yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so
No
well,
energy
okay, we're
space.
getting there, which is that happiness is like energy to move forward. Unhappiness is energy to
Yeah,
change. In between is a low energy
yes,
state,
yeah,
sort of okay. And it's kind of interesting because we can get stuck in okay. We can do this in our personal lives. We can get stuck in okay health. We can get stuck in okay relationships. Not enough signal to change, but there's not really that's totally nourishing either. And it's when things get really difficult, we have to move. But I mean, this is in function as maladaptions, and depression and things like that are something
okay,
different. But normal everyday unhappiness is normally a signal
yeah,
to
it's
change
interesting.
something. So yeah, and I've forgotten what I was going to
Really
say.
interesting. So that's stuck in okay. So that was one of my first questions. Let's just delve into that bit, that low energy space, because I'm then going to come on to Shakespeare about complexity. So let's put the
Okay,
complexity.
yes,
We're going to
yes.
come back to complexity in a minute, but low energy space, um, where life isn't bad, but it's just not good either. So people are in that space there, and they've become a bit complacent. Really, it's just okay. So what is it they need to
Yeah.
do to move out of that? Because they might say they're happy, they're content, they've got everything they need in life because they've never looked at the other side.
I think there's some settling, there's some safety issues. It's like a lot of people have had experiences which have felt unsafe to them before. I don't mean necessarily physically, though there is an awful lot of that. And so I think that okay is okay. It's stable, and they might have come from disruptive families, disruptive school experiences, disruptive former employees, and so okay, and they might have their joys outside of work. A lot of people, that's the way that they do it, and there are a lot of jobs where if your job is very repetitive, or very stable, then stability is okay. I mean, you're not going to get an awful lot of upside from happiness if your job is sort of just working within a system and processing orders. There's not so much that happiness will do there if it don't need a lot of creativity. You don't have a lot of customer facing. You don't have a lot of complexity to deal with. Happiness is going to become more and more important the more
Yeah, yeah,
that becomes more. So there's probably not that much loss of efficiency with that. So it maybe doesn't matter too much. It's not such a nice place to work, but it's fine. And if people are respectful, it's okay. What I would say is, if so like working in an environment, getting closer to an environment such as the NHS, where things are quite it's quite heavy, it's quite oppressive. I don't mean the system's oppressive, it's quite down at
yeah,
the
yeah,
moment as a system. It's like asking people to be happy can feel like almost disrespectful, because it's like it's hard. But the point really is wouldn't you want to enjoy your job a bit more? And how could we do that? And we're not talking about going from like suddenly being ecstatic. I think sometimes people think you're going to have to be happy clappy and everything. It's not that. Happiness at work is about just enjoying your work a bit more, getting rid of frustrations in your work, eliminating those. So that that is in everyone's interest. But the stuck in okay. I mean, normally I think it's systemic. There's normally I see a lot of teams. In my data, that if they're okay one month, only 20% of them are happy in the next month. So there's a lot of stability
yeah,
around
yeah.
that, and that's actually where. organizations' growth is. If organizations want to improve, okay, you're going to have some very unhappy teams. Something's going to happen that's going to get disrupted. You're going to have to intervene. The big improvement is moving the OK teams into being a bit happier. That is where the big opportunity
Yeah, okay,
is.
and I like that in that case. So when we come back earlier about the measurement and the meet and repeat, actually we're doing things here where we can measure it, we'll understand what's going on, and then we're repeating it. So if you've got a team here where you're working to improve it, when they're stuck in okay, we need to just understand what's going on for them, and there's a bit of communication there to make sure people understand what that word happiness means to them as well. Because you have one view, I have a different view, my wife might have a different view, friends at work might have a different view. So it's understanding is one of the key things there.
Yeah. I mean, I deliberately use the word happiness to be a bit provocative, but it's about making more pleasant work. It's about making better quality work. It's about people enjoying their work a bit more. I mean, the number of people who slightly dread going to work in the morning.
Yeah, we always hear that, don't we, about the Sunday evening stress for people when they're dreading going back to work on a Monday morning.
There was that brilliant book years ago, Ricardo Sandler, was it called?
Maverick, and he did another one which I can't actually read it with my eyesight at the moment, but I can see it across the room there from me. But he did a great job in his companies in South America.
One of his motivations, it was a family business, and he inherited it, and he was, I don't know if he was having a cigarette break or whatever. He was outside the office at 5 p.m. and he saw these people joyfully leaving the business, and he thought, "Oh my God, am I keeping people in captivity? Is it paid captivity while they're there?" And something in his head went, "I've got to make their work better."
I've not read that book for probably close to 20 years actually. So it's still on my bookshelf, but it's not been open for a while. So I need to go and look at that again. That's interesting. But it's interesting.
I'm not sure I've still got my copy. I used to have a copy, and you move house, and every time you edit I have to edit my books because they just
I need to go and organise these ones at some stage. But it's really interesting because he saw what's going on there, and he saw that he was stifling that creativity and that happiness because of them going out happy, but they weren't coming in happy. I think there's a lot to be said for that. So there is a balance, though, isn't it? Because you said, at one end there's boredom because nothing's changing, and at the other end there's lots of change and complexity. And this is my segue to talk about Shakespeare, because you said in your book here that Shakespeare was a brilliant playwright. Now we know that, but what you said is he's very good at injecting humour into the story so people don't get stuck on the same way, because they can only take so much complexity in any conversation. Let's just talk about that and how that works into this world of happiness and business and getting people out of stuck in okay.
He did. He knew that audiences liked intensity, but they could only cope with it for so long. And I think that's a lesson for us at work. People talk about, use a sports analogy. They say, "Oh, we want to be a great team and we want to, win the Super Bowl, win whatever." And they forget that sports people only perform for a certain amount of time each week at that high level. And actually, there's a lot of preparation, there's a lot of downtime, there's a lot of de-stressing of their bodies, ice baths if they're really, I don't know, playing rugby like we had last weekend.
That was a good result.
We're recording just after England beat New Zealand, and yes, as an England fan. But they get, and I think people make this sort of misthing that we can always be on. I mean, the army know this with their squads and things like that people can go to the front for a time, but then they have to come back out and withdraw. And Shakespeare did that in his plays. He could do so much intensity, and that is sort of a lean into the smoker thing, which is we need to take breaks. We can only do so much intensity. And I think it's also about the working week, the length of the working week, by the way. I only just touched on it at the beginning when I was first drafting the book. I had a whole chapter on this, which was week, and how people are doing it. It got really condensed because I thought I'm not really proposing that as a general solution. I think it's there, it's an option, but the evidence is very, very clear for the 4-day week that people are much happier and much less stressed working 30 hours a week than 40. It's pretty much over 30, 32 hours people get more stressed, and certainly over 45, 50 they do, and then there becomes a risk of work-life balance gets affected and there comes a flight risk. So I think long hours, ultimately, I don't think you get very good work out of the extra 10 hours you get from people. I don't think you get their best work. You'd be better off letting people work intensely for 30, maximum 40 hours a week, and then letting them break. You get much higher productivity per hour. You'd be a much more humane system if you did that. And actually, work expands to the time available. If you create a long hours culture and nobody goes home, people are They're really staying just because they, as a culture, they don't want to be seen to be the one that dips out. So that's a real issue around
I love that. And interesting, actually, it comes back, again, I mentioned Rolls-Royce at the beginning. I remember when I was at Rolls-Royce, one of the biggest issues we had back in the early 90s was with the working time directive. And that was an issue where the French law at that time was around a 35-hour week, I think, or it might even mean less than that. But actually what you've just said there makes a lot of sense, because actually we get higher productivity. If we have to do our job in 30 hours, we'll do it. If we have 40 hours to or 50 hours, we'll still do it, but it expands to it. So actually it's about condensing it to make sure we get the most balance or integration between being out of work and being in work, and actually delivering the real value when you're there and focusing on it.
I mean, this is particularly when you've got sort of complexity at work. So the equation from the employer's perspective is sort of understandable. Is that it's the number of hours people work, and it's the effort they put in during those hours, and there's a sort of multiplication there, right? So of course it feels in the employer's interest to get unpaid overtime, because you're getting extra time, and you think you're getting the same amount of effort or productivity during that time. The issue is that productivity falls. But time is so measurable that it's you're happy to sort of maximize it, whatever like that. And I think effort is what's difficult. That's why we have engagement measures. We're trying to get a measure of that effort. And what I would say is happiness is a better measure of that. It's a subtler, it's a more profound measure of that, because you're going to get people's motivation from it naturally. You can understand how people fall into the trap. We've got to do it. This is the time is money sort of equation going on as well.
Yeah.
So, I spoke to I think it was in a book called Shorter by Alex, and then he's got a Korean name I can't pronounce anyway. It's called Shorter, and he talks about a consultancy moving to a 4-day week, and that's hard for a consultancy because they sell time. They literally sell time, and they decided to do it because in their competition for talent, they felt they could get more talented people if they offered them 4-day weeks, because that distinguished them from every other consultancy. And they said people, so they got a lot of people. Yeah, I'd love to work 4 days. I've got young kids. I've got this. I'd love to work 4 days a week. But his clients, he had to explain it to his clients. And clients said, "Well, aren't you going to be there on Fridays?" And he said, "No." He said, "But would you really like our Friday time? We're all pretty knackered by our Friday. It's actually less good value for you. You can have Monday to Thursday time, same price." That was a real genius way. Basically, Friday time isn't worth as much anyway. So, he made it into a better deal for the clients.
I love that as a story. And interesting, isn't it? Because actually, when you think about the productivity of people, and to come back to your sports analogy, people can't sustain that high performance. I originally came from an aerospace background and then an automotive background. You can't continually run an engine at full power, because it's going to eventually break. And it's the same with the human body and the human spirit. You can't keep doing it. So that thing about, condensing it into that time window, I love the 4-day, you don't want the Friday piece because we're worn out by that time. Yeah, that's a...
So yeah, and then, you've got this demand coming up for flexibility anyway. I mean, it's huge. It was happening pre-COVID. People go, it was all COVID. No, it was already on a steady up that people wanted more flexibility. And then that COVID just opened the lid a bit, because everybody proved they could. Well, no, not everybody, but people that could work from home proved they could do. And so now we've got a demand for flexibility, and of course this is a difficult thing to negotiate, because you've got competing needs for ultimately it boils down to networking and productivity, which is that when people in the office, they network better. And that's a really important part of both well-being and performance. When people at home, they have more autonomy, they can maybe focus more. So you've got these competing parts of well-being and performance, and finding the right balance. And I think that, in a way, I don't have any problem with anybody saying we're going to be a completely in-person organization. That's our culture. Absolutely, that's your culture. Differentiate yourself. We're completely remote. Actually, I have slightly more problem with completely remote than completely in the office, because the evidence is a little bit that that quite a lot of people think they want to work from home all the time, and they slowly become more depressed. So if you think of tech companies, very easy to work from home. People have computers. These young men, normally young men, sometimes young women, but they tend to be quite introverted. They're in their basement. They're coding. They're then playing video games at night. They're not seeing the daylight. They're not seeing other people. Their demons are going to come out not in their games. There is definitely data showing the mental health issues are worse for working from home all the time. So in my opinion, there's some hybrid, and even if you are fully remote, get together every quarter for 2 days and get to know each other. You've got to at least do that, I think.
And I think there's something to be said there, isn't it? Because if I think back 5 years ago when the world was in the COVID pandemic, people were forced to work from home, and everyone said, "Oh, this is it's a great change. We won't love doing this." But you're right. People have noticed it over the years that since then that they now want to be part of a team, and there are still some who resist because they like working from home. But actually, the productivity and the emotional side of work probably has been lost in that. Therefore, they need to be back in the office, and whether it's quarterly or whether it's more frequently, they need to engage with their team members because that's what drives some form of happiness or, as you said earlier, happiness. Actually, it's about making it pleasant and enjoyable. That's what we need to be doing.
Going to Glastonbury or watching it on TV, you see the same band play the same set. It's a totally different experience in person. And I think work in person is different than work online. Now, as it happens, going to Glastonbury or a festival is a pain too, because you get there. So there's costs on each side, but the experience is very different, and I think in person is qualitatively different than online, and particularly if it's all the time. And I think we just have to accept that, and it's a complex thing. And I got a chapter on it, and I think you have to approach it with intelligence and understand. Right? It's a gain in autonomy, empowerment. It can be a gain in work-life balance sometimes, no, not always, because work can bleed into your home life more. But so boundaries become harder. But you have to think, okay, well, how do we build the connections? How do we build the learning from each other, learning together, and creativity? So I think you have to create, and I think organisations will spread out, and I think that's just okay. There's not one size fits all.
It's interesting, actually. I was delivering a workshop last week, and we used a model from a gentleman called David Rock, who was based out of an Australian university in 2008, and he created a thing called a SCARF model. And the R in SCARF stands for relatedness. And what he said is actually that you need to, in any change program, people have to understand who the human being is. And the relatedness is a big driver of blockages in change, but also enablement of change. And I think that's a really interesting thing when you said about, the drivers there in terms of being remote. If we don't have that relatedness, we don't see the human beings that we work with. Actually, you can't relate to them in the same way. And I think that's a big obstacle that we do need to overcome when we're going forward in the next 5 to 10 years of how do we imagine the new world of work.
Yeah, and that's before we even start talking about AI. And let's not talk about AI because I'm not an expert. But the dehumanizing of work, and I think, and who knows? I'm certainly no expert. I don't know where that's going to play out. But I think the human in it is really important for certainly for innovation and creativity, and for I want one would hope it frees up people, but that's kind of where I get to. There's another point about Shakespeare.
Yeah, go on, keep going. Okay.
So Shakespeare, as well as having the humour to break up the intensity, he only ever put 4 actors on stage at any one time, and he presumably had the intuitive insight, and it's a process which we call mentalizing, theory of mind, that you can only hold in mind a certain number of other people at any one time, and the kind of maximum is 3-4 other people. So if he has a conversation of more than that, it becomes too complex for us to process. And where do we see this in the real world? Well, you're at a party, you're at a cocktail party, you're standing in a group of 4 people, another couple of people come up, you're nice people, you open the circle, you've got 6 of you. Within a minute, that conversation will split in 2. Someone will turn to somebody else, whatever, because we can't really, it doesn't flow, and also we probably don't get enough share of the time, some other things, but we can't put ourselves in mind. And what does this mean? It means if you're having meetings which you want people to be able to share and things to flow.
Yeah, and you talk about 5, the magic number, and I think that's a really interesting point. Interesting, actually, when I read that piece in the book, actually, it shed some light on something. In the past, I used to run networking courses for Deloitte, and myself and Andrew Cooper used to run these together. And we always used to put some networking events on so people can experience it. And you'd always see those groups, we would force them to form, but you then saw those little groups breaking off. And I never knew why they did it. I just knew that emotionally that's what made sense. It was a feeling sense. But now you said about that you talked about Robin Dunbar, I think, was the key point here. The fact that you can't hold that group together. So you've filled a piece of knowledge for me that I've missed in the last 20 years because I've not bothered to research it.
Well, yeah, the 5 comes from Robin Dunbar. The Shakespeare idea comes from Robin Dunbar.
No, I love that, and that's
brilliant.
Yeah, interesting, actually. So I think there's so many things here, and I could go lots of different places now. I'm thinking one of the things that's on my mind in that case, and I wrote a little note just now in terms of this thing about the seven success factors. And I want to think about this just to give people some tips of things to do, because I think there's some power in this. And if I think about the journey we've been on, we talked about happiness. You said about it's more about making it a pleasant and enjoyable place. We've talked about working from home versus working in the office. We've talked about shortening the working week. But let's come back to that word time, because people don't give happiness time. They don't give it time to think about how to build the culture because they're too busy doing it. So we need to put some structure in place to enable to do that. So if we were to give people some tips that they could go away with to go make some of this happen.
Yeah.
7 success of happy teams. I want to just delve into that to look at what do we need to do and how can we start building this into our environment.
The 7 successes are the outcomes. So I talk about the 7 successes. So I think of drivers, happiness, and the outcomes. So the 7 successes are the things like stability, energy, productivity. So they're the outcomes. So they're not the drivers of it. The drivers are what I call the 5 ways to happiness at work. And so I talk about a model which goes from the drivers to happiness to the successes. And so the successes, in a way, we've covered. The drivers, and I want to think about drivers in 2 ways. And this is particularly for, so let's do the more broader one, which is about culture, which is that there are five big ways to team happiness, which are connect, relationships, be fair, treat people fairly, respectfully, empower them, that's autonomy, challenge, which is stretch them, inspire, which is give them meaning, purpose, and accomplishment. In a way, we've sort of touched on all of those. The big hidden thing that I think people don't think enough about happiness is friction and flow in people's sort of daily, weekly work. Because, the culture bit, I mean, I love the 5 ways. That's a bit like the Gallup Q12. It's about what are the drivers of good work, right? That's I have my own take on it. The 5 ways I'll put as positive actions people can take. So I try and make it friendly. But in a way, it's not rocket science. I think that the more innovative bit in my book, in ways, is the friction and flow, which is that in everyday work, there's so much frustrations holding people back. And they're doing so much unrecognized good work. Appreciation, creating a culture where every week you shout out or you say thank you to each other, you appreciate the work you're putting in. And that people go, oh, well, that's a bit soft, isn't it? No, that's how humans are built. We're built on positive feedback, and I don't think there's enough positive feedback in the workplace. And there's not enough feedback, full stop, but not positive. So my challenge to team leaders is take the time again, every week. You can follow Chronos. It's 15 minutes. Aeon, you can do it every week at the same time. But then Kairos, you've got to make the most of it. And how do you make the most of it? You ask people what went well last week. What went well? Start with that. What went well? Listen to people. What went well for you last week? Oh, that's great. And so if you're a team leader, do that. Share also for you what's gone well. Helps the whole team get on the same page about it. These are the things for you to build on, right? They're and then only when you've got that positive feel in the room, say what's holding you back. And what's in your way? What can we? What's frustrating you? And are there things we can solve together here? So that is where your productivity is. So you're focusing on the positives is going to help build everybody. It's going to make them feel more confident. It's going to make them feel better. It's going to make them feel good. They will do good work. Getting rid of the frustrations lets them do good work. And so that weekly habit of 2 questions you should ask every week. What went well last week? Build on that. What's holding you back?
Yeah, I love that. And the bit you said before about the appreciation of the acknowledgement as well. I think so you've got that combination of things coming together where you're appreciating the work you've done. I've noticed you doing these things. And I love that, in scaling up, Vern talks about morning daily huddles. And there's those 3 questions, because we know that those 3 questions unlock the power of the team. But you've just put another spin on it there, which is actually, it's about removing friction and improving flow. And I love that as an approach to why you should do morning meetings.
Yeah. It's just engineering.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah, just really, really simple, isn't it? So that's it. So and then by achieving that, or by doing that, you're then going to get the 7 outcomes, which is that's where you're then going to get the next steps to come from it, effectively. I love
absolutely.
that. So do you mind? I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to just ask you a couple of other questions in that case. So the first question is, what's next for Nic? Because obviously you've written the book, you're putting it out there, you're doing a lot of talks, you're trying to promote this world of happiness, and this is the book that that's the current book. So what's next?
So I this book is a bit evergreen. I don't think it's going to age, and so I'm actually very happy for the next 3 to 5 years talking about it. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think this is I spoke at a conference last week, and I don't know why they called me Chief Happiness Officer, which is fine. I don't mind being called that. And everybody loved it. And I thought, God, haven't you woken up to this? And I think I forget how far ahead of the field I am on this agenda, or how quirky I am on this. And I just think there just needs to be a lot of conversations about taking happiness seriously. So, and I'm quite happy to do that for the next 3 to 5 years. So that's my keynotes or whatever. And then I'd like to put it more into action. I was saying to you, I have a Business Friday Pulse, which basically helps organizations understand, track, and build team happiness. It's a measurement tool, and it's built on that measure, meet, repeat cycle. I have created that system. I founded it. I'm much happier, Nic, if I'm in person delivering stuff than trying to, work behind the scenes, selling a business. I mean, like you and Dom, you're talking about, you guys are much more businessy than me. I'm an ideas person. So I think I personally, I'm 60 now. I would prefer to do more in-person stuff. And so my focus is to do masterclasses, to train trainers to do masterclasses. That's a proposal I've got in at the moment to an NHS area where it's not I don't want to. Well, it's not I don't want to run them. It's just not financially feasible that I could run frontline workshops with everybody across the organisation. So can I train trainers to do it? Can I create materials for them to use? So that's what I'm really, really interested in. I do possibly have another book in me, which would be about personal happiness. And that would be called, I think, Stuck in OK, because I think that really resonates to people, that, people feel a bit stuck. And can I offer things? Most happiness books, I'm actually reading a really good one at the moment called Beyond Happy. I really like the philosophy of it. But it's they come from the science down. And what I'd quite like to do is create something that starts from where people are. I think that's where it changes. So that's probably why I might. So that if I get myself in the headspace to commit to writing again, it wouldn't take me 3 years like the last book, because as you said, I have learned a methodology to how to write now. So I think that's what I'd probably be interested in, but I would need to find a major publisher for that. I don't think there's any point in, at the moment I've got a business book, and it's in the hybrid space, and I'm very happy with that, because I want to make materials out of it. I want to, I could create a short version of it if I wanted to, because I'm actually interested in communicating. But if I was going to do a popular mainstream book, I'd need to have a big publisher. So I sort of half written a proposal for that. I might do that. I've got to really work myself up for doing that. But that's what
I love that. Okay, I love that, and you've got a lot of detail on it. And you mentioned about Friday Pulse in there. So we haven't touched on Friday Pulse, although I alluded to it earlier. Friday Pulse, I think, is a brilliant tool because it gives you that really simple Friday Pulse in what's going on. It's a really, really simple happiness scale. People can go and find that by Googling Friday Pulse directly. That's easy.
Yeah. FridayPulse.com, and then if you want to measure your own happiness at work, we've got a free individual tool which is available there, but you can just go Friday1one.com and that will take you to it. It's also linked from my website, which is nicmarks.org. Because I used to work in the not-for-profit when I got that website, and someone's got .com and he wouldn't tell me. And he's got .com and .co.uk. And I said, well, can you sell me one of them?
No, at least you found another way in that case. And let's think about going forwards in that case, because this world of happiness is evolving. There's always this competing pressure between commercial and culture, and we know that happiness is a serious business, as you said, and I think that's the key to it. And my view is, we need to help more businesses understand this, help them recognize that happy people become happy people become successful people drive successful businesses, because we get happy customers, we get happy employees, the whole system works. And in some ways you're removing the friction in that business to make it flow better. So we need to look at how to really drive this sustainably across business. And I think this is going to be the challenge that you and I and others who are in this space have. How do we help people recognize the need for it?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I think also there is going to be a cohort effect as the next generation come through as leaders. I think there's an expectation around this, and so I think that people of our generation, and maybe particularly men of our generation, we went through the fire when we were young. I mean, I used to work 50, 60-hour weeks, when I was young, and we kind of expect it, and we're kind of, I mean, I got out of that a long time ago. So, and so I think there's a lot of unhappy, successful leaders, and that actually talking about emotions and feelings is like, well, I didn't have that. I don't, So I think we will have a cohort effect that comes. I think this is coming, and I think probably I'm way still ahead of the curve on it in what I'm saying, but I think that organizations that embrace it will future-proof themselves, because the younger generation, they don't have. So when we were young, there was a whole dream, it wasn't the American dream, but we'd get on the property market, we could work hard, we could do this, do that. The younger generation are not buying into that. One, they've seen their parents discarded by businesses, so they don't believe the job for life thing. Two, is property prices are so high that they think it's not worth saving, so I'm going to live for now. So we see all this nomadic, we see people dipping out or doing that. So if you want to work with Gen Z, you need to do this. If you've got a younger workforce, you need to be in this agenda about happiness at work really darn quick, because you'll just lose them to places that get it. And it's not about slides, it's not about pizzas and ping pong and parties. It is about creating good work that people can be proud of. And we people don't mind solving hard problems together. What they want to not be doing is just be frustrated and pressurized and brutalized.
I think that's really interesting, and it's interesting, that continuum, isn't it? We need to get that. We need to make sure we're not getting bored and we're not being over pressured. It's getting that sweet spot in the pressure cooker to make sure that actually we're all working together, and you're creating a nicer place to work at the end of the day. And what's not to like about that?
It's win-win-win all the way. It's wins all the way.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? So Nic, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and there's lots of other questions I could ask you, because I've got more tabs in the book which we didn't talk about. But I think you've given us a really good flavour about why happiness is a success business. Happiness is a serious business, even a success instead. And I think there's a lot to be said for that we all need to do it. We have to play our part in doing it, and it might be that you're ahead of the curve. And as Gandhi said, first they laugh at you, and eventually they join you. So let's just hope at some stage they join you when they come on that journey. So thank you, Nic Marks. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.